I won't lie. I cursed. I fought. I did everything a victim does to avoid becoming a statistic. He pushed me out of the car, into the darkness of those trees. The reason he let me go, the reason I survived and managed to run into the forest, it was the one thing I was most ashamed of at that moment, a ridiculous, intimate detail that shattered his plan. I tapped accept because my phone was at 5% battery. I slid into the back seat and told him the address. The app pinged that we were on our way, and the city hummed around the rain like a thing that would keep going whether I lived or not. He did not take the route the app suggested. There was no abrupt swerve, no cinematic lurch. The first red flag was a small thing. The car passed the exit it should have taken, then the next one. He tapped the steering wheel with his knuckles and said, not unkindly, that this way was a shortcut. The second red flag was his silence, not the comfortable kind that lets a passenger drift off into their phone, but the kind of silence that felt deliberate, as if he were listening to something that I could not hear. We turned off the highway. The city dissolved into stretches of black with poorer houses every so often, then trees closing in. A 2-lane road under a sky that had forgotten what stars looked like. He killed the radio. When he said casually, "I'm going to take you into the woods," it was like the sentence was a test. I laughed because what else do? You laugh to cover for the teeth of fear. He smiled at me in the rearview mirror, the smile that did not reach his eyes. The car was older. The handle on the back door, the chrome catch, felt like a toy. I reached to open it and found that it wouldn't move. The child lock. For a second, I thought it was an accident, that he hadn't noticed. I told him the wrong way, said my address again, louder. He said nothing. He kept driving. Panic isn't dramatic at first. Panic creeps. The chest tightens. Thoughts go thin. You search for the obvious. Battery percentage. Nearest light. A house with a porch light. I tapped the driver's shoulder. He didn't look back. I banged on the partition. He diverted onto a narrower road, then another. The trees leaned like spectators. I began to shout. The car hummed along. He reached for something in the console. He pulled out a cloth glove and slipped it on like a hand putting on its last deliberate piece. Then it started. I had never experienced bleeding like that before. I don't know if it was sheer terror or some hormonal freak of timing, but it rushed out in a way that made the world tilt. I felt embarrassed. I felt horrified. I felt suddenly incandescently exposed. He made a sound like disgust. He swore and slammed the brake. I will not pretend the physiology is incontrovertible fact. There are times stress does strange things to bodies, and sometimes it isn't more than a memory that precedes a rescue. But in that moment, his face changed.
He turned on the radio, swore, and then, in a voice like someone dealing with a mess they didn't plan for, he unlocked the door. He shoved me out. He opened the trunk of his car to his passenger seat, and, threatened, yes, but suddenly practical as well, said he was going to get out and deal with this mess. I ran. When you run into a wood at night, everything exaggerates. Every twig is a shout. My shoes filled with mud. I ran blind, one thought beating in my head. Run. I found a hollow and curled into it like a child. I tried to make myself small. I remember smelling wet earth and the metallic tang of whatever was left of my fear. I remember a truck light sweeping past on the distant road and the relief that physical beams of light can bring. The person who found me later described as a bread truck driver, someone who worked the night routes, food delivery for stores. He saw a figure on the side of the road, pulled over, and I must have looked like a story out of some late-night show, soaked, trembling, an impossible mess. He wrapped me in a blanket, brought me to the station. Police took statements. I told them what I could remember. The driver had been gone. His car might have been clean of any obvious clue. I was left with the memory of teeth not bared, but present, and a body that had betrayed me into being messy enough to frighten a predator off. Later, months later, the idea that something biological, something oddly embarrassing and intimate, kept me alive sat in my head like a small, ridiculous talisman. I would see that man's face on a true crime highlight reel, and my stomach would twist. I learned to lock doors from the inside, to text someone my location before I gingerly got in, to never, ever make assumptions about safety just because someone's smile seemed practiced. That's the first story. If you like these kinds of true rideshare stories, go ahead and hit subscribe now.
This channel shares more like this, and I'll be back with more. I'll be here either way. There is a pattern across these three things, small and probable details that cut the cord of consequence. A biological quirk, a neon sign, a cab at the border. The world gives you tiny keys sometimes, odd luck, and you turn them and get out. The second one I'm about to tell you is not something I lived, but a story I heard from a retired professor who teaches criminal psychology, Dr. Evans. He framed it as a cautionary tale he'd collected from former police reports and from a driver named Ted, who drove for work, odd hours, long trips, the kind of man who saw the underside of highway towns. Dr. Evans didn't claim to have verified every detail. He said the parts that didn't make sense might be gaps in a tired man's memory or signs of someone else's illness. Take this one as what he called an anecdotal composite. It's important to note that up front. Ted was fighting a long route between two cities. He was tired. They all are when you're on those between hours.
A lone passenger got into the front seat, not the back, one of those choices people make when there's space. He was disheveled, his shirt stained as though he'd been on the road longer than anyone should. The first thing Ted noticed was the speech. It wasn't simply an accent or slur. The passenger repeated certain phrases in a cadence that sounded archaic. Not Latin the way you hear in films, maybe, but a clipped liturgical rhythm that made Ted's spine go tight the way a cold gust will make the small hairs on your arms stand up. The man spoke of family criticism in odd formulae, as though reciting something memorized long ago. It's strange how speech can change a room. Words that make sense still pass across the tongue, but the shape of them can bend the air. The passenger's eyes were blank, like a channel of nothing. He said things that read like complaints, how everyone had always told him he didn't belong, but he said them as if repeating a ritual, a loop. Ted tried to make small talk. He asked where he was heading. The passenger answered in the same rhythm, the same words, like a chant. He frowned, because he had been driving long enough to know when a passenger is merely moody and when something else is happening. The passenger's hands were steady on his back, and the bag was the size of a small duffel. For a while, the ride was a kind of strangled silence. Then, when they were still a long stretch from the next fuel stop, the passenger pulled out a long knife, not brandished with showmanship, not in a crazy, over-the-top way. He simply unfolded it like a person removing a lighter. Ted, who told the story later with his hands still shaking, said it was the sort of blade you buy in a hardware store, useful enough for those roads where people fix fences and trucks and such. Here's the tiny, ridiculous detail that staved him, or at least changed the pattern. Up ahead, a neon gas station announced itself. Neon after a stretch of black is like a promise. It throws color and movement into the world in a way that makes predators pause. They have to make a choice about what to do in its light. The passenger glanced at the neon, then closed his eyes. He stood up, knife in hand, and went for the glass door. The bell chimed. He walked to the pump, put his duffel down, and simply remained there as though washing his hands of the whole thing. Ted drove off. Afterward, he learned what Dr. Evans wanted him to see. Monsters don't always look like monsters. They look like strange cadence and blank stares, and things that seem almost laughably mundane until they are not. Whether the man's speech was a mental illness, some ritualized habit, or an act to unnerve people, no one could say for sure. Ted never pulled over for a hitchhiker again. He never took front-seat passengers. He quit driving long haul for a time. There's something to be said for the neon station story. It's not moral, it's not heroic. It's a coincidence that became a doorway.
But the oddness, people speaking in a tongue that you don't understand, should always be treated as a legitimate red flag. The third story is blunter and feels like it could have come from the back pages of a regional paper, a group ride that was a trap. I had a friend in college who used to say, the world is a series of decisions, and the trick is to stack the deck in your favor. I did not make a stack of favorable things that day. I requested a car during a storm. The app said it was a shared ride, pooling, because I didn't want the fare, or because the city was lazy that night, I don't know. The car that pulled up was big, an SUV, and already had other passengers inside, 3 women in the back and 1 in the middle seat. They looked tired, soaked, like people who had a longer night than they planned. One of them had an ankle monitor, inked under the fabric of pant leg and blinking faintly. That detail alone put me on edge. People make judgments, I know, but there are judgments that come with instinct. At the first gas station stop, a sound came from the trunk that should not have been there, a muffled, rhythmical thump, like the kind of noise you hope belongs to a restless dog but isn't. It's the kind of sound you notice by accident because the world made a mismatch. I heard it, and I looked in the rear view. The women acted like the sound was nothing. One of them smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. I asked, crude, out loud, what that was. She said nothing. The car rolled on. Later, how long I cannot say because memory folds on itself in fear, we stopped. It wasn't one of those normal stops. We were on the shoulder near scrubby trees. Someone opened the trunk, and the smell that came up was a thick, sick animal thing. There was a shovel, the kind with a wooden handle seasoned by many hands. There was a bundle that moved enough to make the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stand up. One of the women, the one with the ankle monitor, turned and looked at me with a smile that reached for menace. "You're next," she said, as if it were an invitation. You do not think elegantly in those moments. Flight is noise and muscle and the small momentary calculation. Do I run out or unlock a door? The doors were locked. I saw the little red indicator, locked. My phone was damp. My battery was low. I did what fell into me like a reflex and opened my door and leapt into the shoulder and then the scrub, and I ran. I do not remember how many times my lungs made themselves hurt. I remember a raw kind of terror, the idea that there might be no end. I ran until my legs could not be trusted, and then I ran a bit further. The world was a smear of trees and the sound of my own breath. When dawn was thin and the road got a sheen, a cab pulled by. It looked like a pool of salvation that had been saved for me alone. I flagged it like a drowning person flags a dinghy.
The driver looked at my face, at the state of me, and instantly understood enough about the scene that he drove me to a police station. The police came, took statements, and the car was followed for a while. They found the trunk had nothing in it when they checked. No bundle, no shovel, no evidence of another person, only damp blankets. The group had vanished. The police shrugged and called it a fluke, a misremembered noise. I call it the day I learned not to trust the obviousness of a group's ordinary face. After each of these things, after the woods, after the neon, after the trunk, there's a slow accumulation of rules you keep for yourself. I learned mine the ugly way. I do not get into the front seat unless I can see the driver's face and any passengers look like they want to be normal. I always text someone my ETA and make them watch the map. I screenshot the license plate. I check for child locks. I keep my bag on my lap. I learn that the world hands you cheap keys sometimes. Keep your hands on them. There's also a trauma that attaches itself to small routines. I now check the back seat of any car I use. When a vehicle pulls up at night, I wait for the person to unlock and get out so I can judge them. I don't sit in cars with poor lighting. When I see a neon station in the distance, my chest tightens in a way that remembers Ted's story. When a driver looks at me in the mirror and the smile doesn't touch his eyes, I do not talk. I plan exits like I plan for rain. I keep them prepared. None of this is to say rideshares are all dangerous. Millions of rides are boring and safe, and late-night drivers are decent people. I do not want to make you paranoid, but I do want you to see how easily the ordinary can bend into something dangerous, and how frequently the smallest oddity, an archaic cadence, a biological surprise, a neon pump, becomes the hinge on which survival swings. There are questions that live in the space after these stories. What would justice look like? Maybe we never know. What would make you safer out there? There are things the app can do, share your route, connect you to friends, but many of the true defenses are mundane. Awareness, plans, the courage to make a scene. If you are alone and something feels off, making a call, leaving the car, unlocking your doors as soon as you get in, sending a live location to a trusted friend, these are small acts that meet an enormous need. I remember after the woods, the way that little medical miracle sat in my mouth like candy I could not swallow. I remember after Ted's neon, the way the memory of a man speaking in a cadence that might be Latin haunted me, because language is supposed to be a bridge. I remember after the trunk, how the smile on a woman's lips could be a blade. Each time the thinnest, most ridiculous thing saved the day. Each time, something small became the difference between life
and a story told by someone else.
If you've survived something like this, or if you've ever had a ride that left you with a chill, tell it in the comments. Names and locations aren't necessary. This is about the thing that happened and the way it changed you. If you want more of these, there are other rides to tell. Other tiny miracles in lonely places. Other nights when what should have been ordinary became something else. Hit the link to watch the next one. For me, the final thing I carry is a kind of cautious gratitude. Not for the trauma itself, I do not thank trauma, but for the small, ridiculous luck, the neon station, the biological timing, the cab at the border. They are anonymous saviors, and they make me believe in nothing like fate and everything like chance. So when someone says that one of these riders only spoke Latin, that's not a joke. It's the second scariest thing I've ever heard in a car. It's a reminder that oddness is a red flag. Slow down. Listen to the cadence of a stranger's speech. Notice the way a smile moves. Make a plan for the improbable. Keep your phone charged when you can. Tell someone where you're going. Don't assume normalcy will protect you. There is no tidy moral here, no cure-all checklist that turns risk into a guarantee. There is only this: people survive because of movement, because of choices, because of tiny, absurd interventions. Keep your rules, keep your exits, and when the world gives you a neon, run toward it. Not because it is always salvation, but because sometimes the world's small lights are the only things that keep you from becoming someone else's story. If this landed with you in some way, drop a comment, share a story if you're up for it, and subscribe for more true rideshare horror. If you made it to the end, thank you for listening. Be careful out there.